European Union diplomats say the bloc is ready to hit the U.S. with retaliatory tariffs. That's if Donald Trump makes good on his threats of tariffs against countries that oppose a U.S. takeover of Greenland. European leaders are trying to convince the U.S. president to drop the idea. Trump claimed in a Truth Social post on Sunday that Denmark hadn't done enough to counter the Russian threat to Greenland, adding, quote, "It will be done."
With the threat of US tariffs as a backdrop, the Danish foreign minister is walking a diplomatic tightrope.
Well, honestly speaking, I think you must follow more than one track. I mean, we have been asking since the very beginning of this to have a constructive dialogue with our American ally and friends, free from social media and headlines and strong words. But then at the same time, of course, we need the European Union to respond. I will not develop that response at this press conference. There is close consultation going on among our European friends.
What a European response could look like could soon become clearer. The president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, has called on EU leaders to convene in the coming days to coordinate in the face of recent developments. Just days ago, Denmark was hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough in a meeting with US Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But Trump is refusing to budge on his Greenland takeover ambitions and has announced tariffs on Denmark and other European countries who oppose him. The US Treasury Secretary outlined the reasoning behind Trump's aggressive policy on NBC News, Meet the Press.
We are not going to outsource our national security. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to other countries. And if there were an attack on Greenland from Russia, from some other area, we would get dragged in. So better now, peace through strength, make it part of the United States.
Denmark and the other 7 European countries threatened by US tariffs have issued a joint statement warning against what they call a dangerous downward spiral, but also stating that they remain prepared for dialogue based on the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. But so far there's little to suggest Washington is ready to engage in that kind of dialogue.
Well, in response to the tariff threats from Washington, EU diplomats meeting on Sunday said the bloc was considering countermeasures of its own. They're reported to be worth some 93 billion euros. And as we just heard, leaders will discuss what options they have at an emergency summit later this week. Earlier, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said Europe would not yield to pressure and blackmail. And French President Emmanuel Macron urged the EU to consider an even stronger reaction, an option nicknamed the trade bazooka. The Anti-Coercion Instrument, as it's officially called, would target U.S. goods and services and restrict access to the European single market. Carsten Brzeski is the chief economist of ING Germany. Welcome to DW. Now, Carsten, what exactly is this so-called trade bazooka? It's never been used, has it?
No, it's never been used. It's an instrument that was actually introduced to fence off Chinese competition. And it is an instrument that gives the European Commission the power to really counter any kind of offenses by other countries. Indeed, like you just mentioned, this can be imposing tariffs, imposing investment limits, all kind of action really up to, in the European case, up to digital services coming from the US. So this is clearly a trade bazooka.
Mm-hmm. Now, bazooka or not, there's plenty of options on the table, but it does look like a trade war is becoming more and more likely, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's even more than a trade war. This is clearly, I think, the biggest challenge for the transatlantic relationship for decades. And indeed, they're sticking to trade. We heard the 93 billion euro. That is also one option because this is a list of tariffs that the European Union prepared last summer. in reaction to Liberation Day by US President Trump. But they put it all on hold. This being on hold will expire early February. So this is, if Europe does nothing, these tariffs will become effective. This is the 93 billion euro. And it could go even further. There are some Europeans currently also floating this idea that European investors might withdraw their investments in US treasuries and US equity. So this is indeed, if we continue like this, this is a clear recipe for further escalation from both sides.
How do business leaders feel about geopolitics essentially being carried out on their backs?
Well, this brings back new uncertainty. And to some extent, last year was already a year with very high uncertainty, enormous geopolitical changes and tensions. But still, the Western economy did relatively well. European exporters clearly took a hit from these US tariffs, but at the same time, they got used to it. But I think that 2026, how this year started, will stress test these geopolitical tensions and the disconnect between markets and macro so far. So how can business leaders really react? They will probably react with pausing any investment decisions, be them abroad or be them domestically.
Let's say a trade war really does erupt. What would the impact on consumers be?
We see it in the US already. What do tariffs mean? In the end, tariffs mean that the consumer in the country that is imposing these tariffs will eventually have to pay the price. We see this already now in the US, as there are a couple of prices clearly going up. If Europe now also was to retaliate by imposing tariffs on US products, the European consumer would probably also have to pay the price for it, at least to some extent. If Europe was to impose tariffs on US digital services, this for European consumers could either mean that they will simply be cut off US digital services, or that in the end they will also have to pay a higher price for US digital services. So this is clearly, and it is a recipe for uncertainty for businesses. It is a recipe for higher prices, higher inflation for consumers, and that's really pretty clear here. Trade wars never know winners. There are always losers on both sides. Only some parts or some countries lose more than the others.
You say there's losers on both sides, but I'm sure there's a winner somewhere. Who stands to gain from all this?
Well, I think then you should look geopolitically again, and I guess that Russia will clearly currently lean back and simply enjoy what the transatlantic allies are doing here, because we all of a sudden lose all the attention that there still is an ongoing war in Ukraine, that there is a clear security risk for Europe coming from the eastern side, and I think that is someone who could benefit from the current situation. Other regions across the globe will also benefit if investors think, well, this is so uncertain in the US and Europe, let's try to find places where to invest. And this could then be Asia, this could be Latin America. These are places that could eventually benefit from this fight between the US and Europe.
Now, we don't have much time, but this, of course, all coincides with the start of the World Economic Forum in Davos. Donald Trump will be there, as will many European leaders now involved in this crisis. Do you expect a de-escalation after face-to-face meetings, briefly, if you can?
I find it very hard to come up with any view here. In all honesty, we've seen that in the past that de-escalation can happen, but we've also seen in other cases that the US is willing to push through. So I'm unable to come up with a useful view on what's happening over the next days right now.
Carsten Brzeski, Chief Economist of the financial services provider ING in Germany. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.